This is a very short presentation and specifically focused on poultry sampling for highly pathogenic avian influenza. Obviously, these methods can be transferred to wild birds as well, but the presentation is specifically focused on poultry. Thanks, Celia. Just as a recap, so Alyssa has given a very thorough overview of the clinical signs. So the underlying pathogenesis of HPAI, essentially the influenza A virus undergoes intracellular viral replication, initiates a cytokine storm through multiple organs. There's multi-organ vascular thrombosis and ischemia, and also coagulopathy or disseminated intravascular coagulation. And for this reason, the range of clinical signs are quite broad. So I have simply taken out from the manual produced by Department of Agriculture, guide for Australian veterinarians, exotic animal disease. But the clinical signs, as Alyssa explained, are actually quite extensive. So sudden death or per-acute form of highly pathogenic avian influenza. Those birds that don't suffer from the per-acute form may show a wide variety of signs, including excessive watery eyes, sinusitis, cyanosis of the comb, wattle and shanks, edema of the head, loss of appetite, and neurological signs. We can also see, as Alyssa explained, particularly in layer poultry, decreased feed consumption, decreased water, and egg drop, misshapen eggs in these layer birds. Thanks, Celia. So prior to any sampling, the key thing is obviously the zoonotic risk. As Alyssa has explained, for H5N1 2.3.4.4b, there are very few cases of severe human disease. However, other variants of pathogenic avian influenza will cause significant clinical signs in people. Therefore, basically, if HPAI is one of your differentials for the clinical presentations, including sudden death of poultry, please consider appropriate PPE. As you're all aware, and I certainly don't need to go into this in detail, the main spread as a zoonotic agent for HPAI is through aerosol spread. So using appropriate N95 mask, protective eyewear, gloves and protective clothing prior to handling and sampling birds. Obviously, this also includes necropsy of the bird, and we'll come to that at the end of the presentation. Thanks, Celia. This is a little bit of writing, but hopefully something which is really, really logical. Okay, so we're just going to focus on sampling for HPAI. We're not looking at extensive sampling from the necropsy bird. This is essentially for inclusion or exclusion of influenza A. So the virus transport media is stored frozen. Just before you take the sample, defrost the sample so that it's in liquid form when you place the swab into the tube. One flock swabs for the trachea, the other for the cloaca. Preferably, if low numbers of birds are sampled, 1 to 3 birds, one tube is used per sample. So the rationale behind this is even though the virus transport media does contain antibiotics to minimize microflora replication, particularly bugs which are found in the cloaca, it is preferable for maintenance if there is a virus, an influenza virus there, that the tracheal sample is separate from the high bacterial load of the cloacal sample. But if you're sampling more than 3 birds, pooling of trachea and cloaca from the same bird in one tube is fine. The primary point of testing is detection of nucleic acid. The next step, that test is actually done here at Gribble's Vet Lab, but the next step is then culture of the virus if there is a positive influenza A growth. For culture, that's done at the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, a reference laboratory at Geelong. That is done on individual birds. In addition, the sensitivity, the ability of the test to be able to detect true positive birds is decreased once you start pooling. In the case of what we call an index property, in other words, this is your first investigation, we want to maximize the chance of detection, even if there's only low levels of the virus. So one bird, one tube. We can provide those VTM tubes. Please contact the laboratory and they can be sent to your clinic. In addition, veterinary officers from PIRSA will also have tubes stored frozen at their offices, so you can contact a regional veterinary officer and they might be able to deliver the tubes quicker if, for our case from Adelaide, we're sending them on an overnight courier. And just a very, very small note, just note that the virus transport media, even after it's defrosted, can actually be refrozen if the lid hasn't been taken off. That is, if it's an unused sample. So just a small point. Thanks, Celia. Just to reinforce here, it's best, if practical, to undertake a tracheal swab. Some guides will say an oropharyngeal swab is adequate. Studies have shown that the highest numbers of virus particles are actually found within the trachea itself. So in the live bird, in poultry adult, it really isn't a problem. By gently restraining the bird and then just simply opening the mouth and retracting the tongue, you can visualize the trachea. In very small chicks, that's different, and we generally recommend using pediatric flock swabs, and we can supply those. They're much smaller, of course, in diameter and are more suitable for juveniles. Thanks, Celia. And the cloaca, a very minor point, just focusing on contact with the cloaca where we've actually got influenza A particles, and please minimize any dander collection on the swab itself when you take it. But essentially, taking from the cloaca and then directly inoculating into the virus transport media. Thanks, Celia. Transport. Now, this is the key thing. If you are suspecting, obviously, highly pathogenic avian influenza, it's really important that you actually make contact with your local PIRSA veterinary officer first, prior to dispatch of samples to the laboratory. Alternatively, you may have already contacted the EAD hotline number, and that will be shown at the end of the presentation. It's really important for clear communication. In addition, as you dispatch the sample, please notify the laboratory. That way we will prioritise the sample as soon as it arrives, and we coordinate the urgency with PIRSA. When you're packaging the samples, please write individual identifiers on each tube. Sequential numbers are quite okay. Obviously, if there's a number of sheds involved, you may actually just have a summary spreadsheet identifying which birds to which shed. If it's obviously a backyard poultry setup, that's not relevant. But please just individually identify each bird on each tube. Double bag the samples because, of course, these are suspected to be exotic disease infected samples. So double bagging is recommended. An esky, just to maintain temperature. We don't want to freeze the tubes, but as we get into warmer months, it's vitally important that the tubes do not go over 10 degrees Celsius. So by having a ice pack there, it just maintains that chill. Attach the laboratory request form to the outside, please, of the esky. That way our staff, as soon as they receive the sample, they'll be expecting it anyway because of your phone call, but they can visualise without opening the container what is in there. through the completed request form. The sample should arrive at the laboratory within 24 hours of collection. If that is not practical, it's really, really important that you contact us, please. And we will make sure that we put in place a collection process so that the samples are collected within 24 hours. If you are collecting on the weekend, it's important to coordinate through the EAD hotline, please, because we can organise to receive samples out of hours. This is in the case where you suspect HPAI, an exotic disease. Just to clarify it, but as you'd all be aware, PIRSA veterinary officers will determine the urgency of testing. And it's really, really important that a full detailed clinical history is provided to the veterinary officer as well as completed on the request form. As you'd understand, this is a legal document. It's really important that we have as much detail as possible so that not only that we can prioritise the testing, but we can also then provide a range of differential diagnoses that we can work with you on. And obviously, we may also be talking about submitting whole birds for necropsy at the laboratory if we're suspecting exotic disease. And finally, as you be aware, PIRSA covers the cost of all approved AI testing. Thanks, Celia. These are just a couple of links, and there'll be further links on the end of the presentation. Animal Health Australia, obviously the AusVet plan. This is primarily in the event of an outbreak, but essentially some of the information in the presentation I have taken from that document, in particular the personal protective wear, the range of clinical signs, and the types of samples. So those swabs can be taken either from live or dead birds, as we've discussed. And obviously the PIRSA website also has a range of resources for avian influenza. So just in summary, this is for investigation only of highly pathogenic avian influenza or where avian influenza is a differential diagnosis. PIRSA and Gribble's Vet Lab hope to present later this year a online seminar on necropsy of poultry and other birds, in which will include the process for not only sampling of avian influenza and Newcastle disease, but a range of other diseases which have similar clinical presentations, and it will be targeted for submissions of backyard poultry to private veterinary practitioners. Thanks very much.